Hello, this is Michael Husky. I'm one of the developers at HearForm Audiology software. In this introductory video, we'll be looking at an overview of the HearFormPRO 2018 home screen. But before we begin, let me briefly explain how I prefer to create training materials. I like to produce these videos through a conversational method. Instead of scripting every single word, I will simply communicate in a very casual manner. I'll occasionally make mistakes while narrating the videos, but rather than stopping the process and starting all over again, if you don't mind, I'll try to correct myself as needed. With that said, let's begin looking at the HearFormPRO home screen. We call this the overview or home screen because it is designed to give you a lot of information in one area. Now that information can be overwhelming at first, and part of the goal of this video and subsequent videos is to explain how and what this home screen means and what it does. So I'm going to look at a variety of different sections here with you, and again in subsequent videos we'll deal with all of these different details by breaking them down into shorter segments. So at the very top of the screen here we have a menu bar, and the menu bar may be a little bit different in your version depending on your rights and privilege set. But in this area we can do a variety of different things, and again I won't get into those right now, but for example under what's called the scripts menu I have a variety of shortcuts that allow me to do a number of different things here. We also have a help section which will help you regarding FileMaker Pro, the application that runs HearForm, but we will have separate help available for HearForm itself. And as we go a little bit lower, we have some buttons that will come in handy. Again, we'll explain these later, such as navigational buttons to go back and forth. Or in this area here, I have a slider bar. I have the total number of records here by the circle, showing me the found set or isolated group of records. I can show all patients, add new patients, and do a number of other things. And that's in the toolbar at the top. Then I have a layout menu that allows me to go to different parts of the program here. And in some areas, previewing, for example, a letter will show you how a letter will look when it's going to print. Let's talk about some of these other sections towards the bottom and the middle of the screen. At the very bottom, I have some buttons down here that will let me, for example, zoom in and out of the screen. And I can log in and out depending on if I want to log in with administrative rights. I can open a new window, and again other buttons that I'll explain in great detail later, but that's the bottom or footer of the home screen. On the left hand side, this area here serves a dual purpose. As you can see as I move the mouse up and down, we have a variety of buttons here from scheduler, invoicing devices, etc. Now I'll explain each of those buttons and what they do in a subsequent video. In addition to the wider button in the middle, we also have a smaller button to the left and to the right of that area. And in most cases, those buttons will do different things. For example, as I go down here to labels, I can navigate to the labels module, or I can print a single label for a patient by clicking that button. So again, we'll explain what those buttons do, but those will certainly come in handy. We can also navigate backwards and forwards with these buttons, very similar to the buttons up here. And we can go to the last record in the system or the first record using those buttons. The center icon will allow us to slide over in what's called a slider panel, slide over and see a list of all the patients that we're working with. Now in this case it happens to be all 972 patients. But for example, if I wanted to isolate every patient whose last name begins with the letter S, I can click that button, and now I've isolated up here by the circle, what we all call the pie chart from now on. The pie chart shows that 82 records matched that criteria, which means names that start with the letter S, and it's isolated all those patients so I can work with them individually here. We'll talk about that in detail shortly. So I can scroll up and down, I can omit individual records, and it's just a nice way to see information about that list. Any previous HearForm users will recognize this button up here, which allows me to view them as a list in this way and see quite a bit more information. But I'm going to go back to the home screen and look at this again. So the left section we've discussed briefly. Anytime you have a slider panel, you'll see a little dot at the bottom, and I can click that dot to slide back and forth between those two options. If you have an iPad, you can also use your finger to swipe. We also have dots at the bottom of this section here, the chart notes, and the hearing aid area there. Again, you'll use those periodically. So let's start talking about this section right here. We'll call that section A. Section A allows us to put a photograph of the patient. Their first name and last name is combined up here, and that just takes whatever is in the first name field here and the last name here. So that's just a nice area where I can click on that area, and as you'll see in subsequent videos, I can just do a very quick search for Mary S. And in this case, it found 5 people who match that criteria, who have the letter Mary and the last name S. So I can use that area again to search, but we also have a number of buttons that are at the end of this, and I'm going to explain what each of those buttons mean later. When I hold the mouse over a button, you'll see in this case it says Caption Call Options. It only shows that it stays up there for a few seconds, so you may have to go back to that and hold it over again. But that gives you a quick idea with this balloon help, if you will, what each of these buttons actually do. Now, we don't have balloon help on every single button, but most buttons we do, and that might come in handy if you want to see what a button does before you click on it. So as we continue, I can hide or show the colors of my markers here, and this lets me indicate something that might be helpful. For example, as I hold this over a VIP patient, the balloon tells me, or non-ambulatory help, or dementia, etc. So you can set up those buttons any number of ways. As you'll see, again, I'm not going to get into great detail right now, but anytime you see a pencil on a piece of paper like that, or generally when you see that, it will indicate that you can make some adjustments there and set it up properly for your needs. As I scroll over a little bit more, I have this alphabet here. We used to have the alphabet on the left-hand side vertically, now we have it horizontally, but as I showed you before, I can click on a letter and it will automatically isolate that group for me and show them in a list on the left-hand side. I have some buttons over here. I'm not going to be clicking all the buttons in this video. We want to keep it as short as possible. But for example, we're able to make the screen less cluttered now by offloading some of that to separate areas. For example, if you want to see the record information, who created it, or when it was last modified, you can click that button. In the same way, you can click a preferences area to hide or show. For example, notice that the colors disappeared, or I can hide or show the alphabet if you're not going to use that. So we can hide or show lots of different areas of the home screen, making it less cluttered if in fact that's something that's important to you. So I'm going to close that, and those were these little buttons right here. So in order to fill out information, you'll see that it's just like filling out a form on the internet. You use the tab key to move from one field to the next. You can also use your mouse if you'd rather just click in that field. And in many cases, there'll be things like a drop-down list of choices. A drop-down will give you the ability to click on that with your mouse and quickly enter that information instead of having to type it in. So in this demographics area, we have first name, last name, date of birth, all that sort of thing there. We have information regarding a family member and the relationship. We have an email address. And as you'll see, we have the ability to add multiple addresses, multiple phone numbers, and multiple email addresses by clicking a button. And we'll talk about those areas later. Down here, we see a referral source. Now I'm going to remove that word physician there, and just to show you that when there is not information in a field, then we see a little gray series of words or an individual word showing what that field represents, in this case, referral source. So when I choose the word physician, then over here I see I have a choice to enter which particular physician. And we'll talk about the multiple drop-down lists of choices for that now, as well as the recall area and some of the other areas here. We can assign a clinician to the patient. We can assign an office location to the patient. And as you'll see later, we can work with HIPAA privacy policies and the ABN in case these things are important to you, and we'll talk about what those mean later. So this first section, I've kind of covered it in detail for, or generally I should say, for this section, but as we want to see more information, then I can click one of those little dots, and that same section now looks a little bit different. So here's where I can assign a physician. Maybe the patient was referred by a newspaper or a direct mail piece, but you still want to assign a physician, or you may want to assign a payer, an insurance company, and other information there. We can do that under this screen. We'll talk about that later. Additional information regarding marital status, all kinds of things that you'll look at there that might come in handy. And as I scroll over just a bit more, patient comments, family comments, and other information that will be helpful. And then finally, we can pull up a map of the patient's house. We can expand the map, show patient directions on the map, and do a few other things. So we'll just go back to our first screen, and we've covered just this small section A here. Over to the right of that, we have section B, we'll call it, and this area allows us to set a default slider. So for example, if you want to see the patient's history of all of their previous appointments, you can see that, and it's really helpful to see why the patient came in and what the result was perhaps. You can even expand with this button here, expand that to see additional information about that patient. But if you're not going to use our scheduler, well, that really is just taking up valuable space. So you can use any of these other dots, such as right here. Now in this case, we have a picture of some ears on there that might be something that you want to see, or you may prefer to just have the standard kind of X's and O's, which is what most of our folks have. I just wanted to show you that kind or that style. But you might want this as your default instead of the area that shows previous appointments. But we also have other areas that you can go to as needed, or you can use them as a default, including a universal to-do list, the ability to print a variety of different forms and letters right to the patient as an individual letter or a group of letters, or email those or fax them and that sort of thing. So for both forms and letters, those are separated now into their own areas. And then finally, something I just love, and that's our HearForm Media Center. These top buttons and bottom buttons are currently active, and they will show you videos and have documents available for you to use yourself or to be able to email those to patients. So we won't belabor that. We'll have a subsequent video discussing that. So we'll just call that section B, and right below it, we have custom fields that you can now have up to 30. As I scroll through, you can see up to 30 custom fields. You can customize the drop-down list of choices that are there, and you can customize the field names to say anything you want. So it's super easy to be able to edit these things now. And again, I can now put 30 separate custom fields on the home screen without making it super cluttered with 30 separate fields. And we think that that's going to make it a little bit easier for you to learn and to use. Now we'll go down to this section here, we'll call it section C, and this allows us then to see a larger chart note than in the past. We used to have an individual line and then have 3 separate lines or maybe 4 separate lines. Now we can see just one note, the most recent note, but you can always scroll over by clicking the buttons here or the next button, and you can see additional notes, but a lot more of that note again is available, and we think that makes a bit more sense. And again, you can click a button and see additional things or have the option to print that out if desired. So we'll go back to this first dot here. And at the bottom of this area, we have an area where you can enter hearing aid information. Again, if there's nothing in the field, it'll say enter serial number, side, type, purchase, that sort of thing. But you can also hold the mouse over. And by the way, if you don't like the flyovers, because after a while you're going to learn all that, well then you can hide those flyovers. I believe it's right here. We can show or hide the normal tooltips, as they're called. I called it balloon help before, but they call it tooltips in FileMaker. So if you don't want to see those, you can hide them. But also the field names are in there, and we also have those under the dots, so you can't quite see all of this. It cuts off in the video a little bit, but as I hold the dot over, it tells me serial, dome size, speaker size, tube size, etc., device color, and it gives me an idea what I'm going to see before I even go to it. So now we can see that in fact we have dome and speaker and tube size and that sort of thing right here. So I can scroll through and see different areas that may not matter about a serial number for a remote device if there isn't one involved, but sometimes an ear mold material or a vent or something like that might have some value if you're keeping track of devices that way. So this bottom section really helps, and as you'll see later, we have some nice reporting in there, and you can have a history of everything regarding that particular device. Now let's go ahead and look over at the right side. Now not everyone will see this part at the right side. You'll notice that this is kind of an elongated video. There's black bars at the top and the bottom, and that's because I wanted you to be able to see all the way over to the right side. Some of you will not have a wide monitor, and you may not want to see that. Instead, you may want to see that documents area, as it's called, by clicking a button here, and it will pop up a very similar looking window right in the middle of your screen. And that's, again, if you have a resolution on your monitor that won't show that without having to scroll over. It's a little bit of a bother to scroll over. And so you may just want us to hide this area here. And we can hide that very easily if you'd like. But this is an area where I can have an unlimited number of documents scanned into each patient's folder, and that information will be displayed right on the home screen. I can list that directory and just show what's in it. And again, I can double click on a file and open it in its native application here. Let me just minimize that. But we'll talk about that later. It's really a great thing to do if you want to go relatively paperless. So this gives you a very brief overview of what's called the HearForm home screen, and I really look forward to going over in great detail with you some of the other features that are available, in addition to detail about what we're looking at right here. Thanks very much for watching.